There are 12 crore Indians above the age of 60. That number is going to get to 32 crores. We're going to have one US-sized population in India, which is going to be above the age of 60. So if you look at India, there are two pension schemes that are there. Now, if we don't start providing for them,
Sriram Iyer is the CEO of HDFC Pension. With nearly 3 decades of experience in banking and financial services, he's a champion for retirement planning. Sriram joins us today to discuss how NPS can be a game changer for securing your retirement.
there is no other product in the world which is as cheap as NPS. So even a child can start investing.
Did not know that.
The other thing that I want to talk about is that
Talking about pension society, you compared various countries. Where does India stand?
very poorly. We've got a long enough runway, but you have to wake up fast.
Thanks so much for being with us today. And I want to just dive in deep and just start off by understanding the behavioral aspect behind retirement planning. Yes, there is a lot of awareness about it, but there's still as much procrastination about it. Why do you think that is?
So I think the first thing to sort of take account of is the fact that India is an incredibly young country, right? So our median age in India right now is 29 years, 28, 29. I mean, there are some different statistics, but 29 is the number, right? Which means that 50% of the population is still a good 30 years away from the so-called retirement age of 60, right? At least in the corporate sector, that's considered to be the retirement age, 58 or 60, but more corporates are now moving into 60, against 58. So therefore, a very large segment of your population today is 30 years away from this so-called, retirement age, right? And therefore, you should leave that population aside. If you look at the rest 50%, which is the remaining 70 odd crore Indians, there are close to 12 crore Indians today who are above the age of 60, right? Which means that the remaining 58 odd crores of people are in the age range of, let's say, 32, let's say 58, 60, right? So that's the cohort that you today have. Now, so, something like this, something like a retirement, age at which you retire, given the fact that it is so far away, right? It's very difficult to start thinking about something which is so much in the distance, right? And therefore, while conversations like these, the one that we are having, and the conversations that I've had with others in the past, and in general, the awareness around financial planning as a broader umbrella, is shining the light on the importance of retirement planning as well. Because people who are getting closer to retirement do realize that, at times if you don't take stock of your situation, your financial situation, at the right time, it may be way too late, right? And maybe they're also coming out in the open and talking about it to their next of kin, next generation, saying you guys should start thinking about it. Otherwise, it may just be too late, right? So I guess that's the way I would look at this whole conundrum of why are people not so, that's the age profile that we have in this country.
But what is the big danger of doing that? Because in fact, we had reports indicating that most of the people in India haven't even saved up beyond, the next 10 years or so, or even less than that. So what's the big danger of not saving up in time for retirement?
See, one is the fact that the sooner you start, we have all heard, we are all familiar with the power of compounding. The fact that, every extra year sort of accelerates your terminal corpus by a significantly large amount, right? I mean, I don't want to bore the audience with, another story on compounding and how compounding is magical. And it is indeed magical. And I think everybody understands this very well now, right? Having said that, I think so that's one thing that you lose out on, right? If you don't start early enough, you're going to essentially, for every 5 years of delay, you're going to bring down your terminal corpus by 30-35%, right? So that's a significantly large loss that you will potentially make, right? Now, other than that, if you don't start planning and if you're going to live hand to mouth, I mean, if you look at the statistics today, I mentioned earlier that there are 12 crore Indians above the age of 60 today, right? That number is going to get to 32 crores in the next 25 years. So in the next 2.5 decades, you're going to have 32 crore Indians above the age of 60, which is a number which is larger than the population of many countries today, right? US has got a total population of only 33 crores. So we're going to have one US-sized population in India, which is going to be, above the age of 60. Now, if we don't start providing for them today onwards, right? And I think we are in a very sweet spot. That date is probably 25 years from now. And therefore, we've got this fantastic runway of creating an ecosystem and creating awareness around this starting now, such that we are not left with a millstone around our neck 25 years from now.
Okay, you're talking about how it's going to be a sizable number, 32 crore above the age of 60 in the next 25 years.
Yeah.
So say someone is watching this and they're rather inspired and they're saying, hey, I might as well take control of my finances, make the most of the power of compounding. Where do you start? How do you begin? How do you choose between market-linked options like NPS as fixed return instruments as well, like PPF? Where does one begin?
See, this has to, at the end of the day, fold into the broader umbrella of financial planning, as I said, right? Retirement planning is a subset of financial planning, right? So anybody who starts to, start making sense of their overall portfolio, I mean, what is their current savings? What is their ability to save as time progresses? Which are the instruments that they're invested in today? Which are the kind of investments that they would want to invest going forward? What is the risk appetite? All of those things matter, right? But step one is to get your house in order, right? More often than not, income minus expenses is equal to savings. It has to be income minus savings is equal to expense. So that equation has to change, right? If you change that equation, it is not easy to do. For somebody who's 25 years old, just out of college, started earning, that next new fancy iPhone is a lot more attractive than starting to save for retirement. Right?
Sure.
So to that extent, I think we need to empathize with them as well. I don't think it's not right on our part to sort of talk down to somebody who's 24, 25-year-old and say, no, you know what you're doing is wrong, and you should start putting aside money for, a rainy day, which they will, right? But I think they're well within their rights to consume at that stage of life, right? So there is nothing wrong in doing that. But I would say you need to make a beginning. And the beginning is made by saying, what is my broad, what is it that I want to eventually end up doing, right? Which is, you will want a certain corpus, you would have certain milestones along the way. There will be, somebody may be interested in studying further 5 years hence, right? I mean, that could potentially be a goal. Marriage ends up being a goal. Marriage of the children ends up being a goal, and so on and so forth. At different points of time, you have different goals that are in place. And therefore, this whole financial planning architecture puts all of these, helps you make sense of this whole journey from here on till the next 30, 35 years, right? So you need to look at it from that context. Products come right at the end, right? I mean, you need to first, and if you look at a 25-year-old individual, I would argue that if you look at 3 decisions that everybody makes, when you invest, there are 3 decisions that you make, right? First decision that you make is what is your asset class, asset allocation decision, right? The second is the product selection decision, right? And the third is the market timing decision. These are 3. So any investment decision has got these 3 subsets, right? The most important, element of this framework is the asset allocation decision, which is where the least amount of time gets spent. The maximum amount of time gets spent in what is the least important thing, which is market timing, right? In my opinion. And there is research to prove that over long periods of time, 90% of the impact of the size of the portfolio and what you end up making is essentially a function of what is your asset allocation decision, right? Not so much product selection or not so much, market timing, right? So when you break this whole seemingly complex task of financial planning into very simple, actionable steps, right? Then you come to saying, okay, if I'm a 25-year-old, it makes eminent sense for me to maximize my allocation to equity, right? Because I've got a runway of 30, 35 years for most of the goals that I will have, right? And if that's the kind of time that I have, the luxury of time that I have, then I must participate in a product which has a very high probability of giving me a double-digit compounded return over long periods of time with negligible risk, right? As time progresses, the risk of equity diminishes, right? And I'm, of course, referring to a basket of equity. I'm not referring to equity, singular stocks. I'm referring to a basket of vehicles, right? So I think even that realization at a young age that I need to start building an equity portfolio and do it through numerous, make that beginning. NPS, of course, offers significant tax advantages, especially if you're a salaried individual. It offers significant tax advantages. So is the case with other retirement products that are there. But I believe that in the entire retirement product architecture, NPS stands out in various ways, right? Not just in terms of the kind of performance that it has delivered over the last 20 years that it's been in existence, but it offers tremendous advantages on various other fronts that we can get into subsequently in this conversation.
So I want to talk a little bit more about that. What are the tax advantages when it comes to NPS as well as PPF?
So I will leave aside PPF for now because that's a product that is very well known and understood by most people in the market, right? So I'll focus my attention on NPS, right? Now, NPS is the product has been in existence since 2004. This was first launched for government employees and central government employees in the year 2004. Eventually, from 2004 onwards, a number of state governments also started offering it as a replacement for the old pension scheme, which was a defined benefit pension scheme. What is a defined benefit pension scheme? Essentially, defined benefit pension scheme is a scheme where your pension is a function of the last drawn salary, right? Or some such metric, but your benefit is defined, right? So in 2004, the government, in its wisdom, and I think incredibly incredible amount of foresight by the team that got this product in place. If you look at this product from the context of the fact that this product was built 2 decades back, I mean, this is a product which even today is absolutely topical, right? I mean, every single feature in that product is almost futuristic. I wonder at how this team which came together, it was a fantastic team which was led by Dave, who was the ex-chairman of UTI, and he was put in charge of this OSS committee, as it is called. And there were some very eminent people that came together to build this product. So if you look at NPS as a product, one, of course, the tax advantages is what you wanted to understand. So there are 2 types of tax advantages that NPS carries. So first I'll talk about the tax advantage for all citizens model, as it is called, which is essentially something that any individual in India can invest in NPS. You can get an advantage of 1.5 lakhs under ATC, Section ATC. Section ATC also covers other products like PPF, like Employee Provident Fund and other products as well. But you can use that 1.5 lakhs to invest in NPS. And then there is a separate 50,000 that you can invest in NPS, that section is called ATCCD 1B, right? Under ATCCD 1B, you can invest another 50,000. So for an Indian who's a self-employed individual, who's not a salaried individual, or this is of course available to a salaried individual as well, but for the salaried individual, it gets incredibly better, and I'll explain that subsequently. So for any individual, you get a total investment window of up to 2 lakh rupees, which you can, and this is all under the old tax regime, right? As you know, old tax regime, new tax regime, there is this whole debate that's been happening, but 72% of Indians today are in the new tax regime. If you look at the last data that was published for assessment year 25-26, so there is a very large number of people who moved to the new tax regime, right? So this benefit of up to 2 lakh rupees is available under the old tax regime. Now I'll come to the salaried individual, and this is what is referred to as the corporate NPS scheme. Now, this is something that is very poorly understood. And in my own experience over the last few years, talking to numerous people at numerous levels in industry, I mean, with CFOs in large companies, CEOs in large companies who profess to understand personal finance very well, and even financial advisors. I mean, when I talk to them, when you talk about NPS, the first thing that comes to their mind is, oh, this is that 50,000 rupee product, right? Where I get a 50,000 rupee tax break. There couldn't be anything farther from the truth than that. Actually, the benefit that as a salaried individual, what you make out of this is actually 14% of your basic you can set aside and invest in NPS, right? This is under what is called as the section ATCCD2. Under this section, there are 3 vehicles which are included in this section. Employer contribution to Provident Fund. Second is employer contribution to NPS. And the third is what is the superannuation fund, right? So superannuation funds have sort of died out. I mean, there are very few companies which have a superannuation fund any longer. It used to be a very popular product, many years back. I mean, right till maybe 5-7 years back, superannuation funds were popular. Vehicles where companies would start putting aside money for, employees to, sort of take out from at the time when they part ways with the organization or when they retire, right? So these were typically PSUs used to, public sector undertakings used to have superannuation funds, right? Superannuation funds are pretty much died out, right? So you basically have 2 vehicles that are very popular even today: employer contribution to EPF and employer contribution to NPS. So in NPS, you can actually contribute up to 14% of your basic, right, towards NPS, and therefore you save marginal rate of tax on that. So let's say somebody's a 30% tax rate, and if that individual has got, let's say, a 20 lakh basic or a 10 lakh basic or whatever may be the case. So essentially you end up saving on that 14% of basic, you save 30% tax, right? Okay. It's a very, very powerful feature, very few people are aware of it,
Yeah.
right? And that's what people like us and HDFC Pension, for example, we are the largest corporate NPS point of presence as well. So we are the largest, apart from being the largest private sector pension fund manager, we are also the largest corporate NPS point of presence. We work with 3,000 plus companies today. Over 4 lakh subscribers have been onboarded by us through our platform, right? So that's what we spend all our time doing, essentially to make sure that we have shined the light on this very unique tax feature, which is available under the old tax regime and the new tax regime,
Yes.
right?
So you were lauding the government as well with their foresight for NPS.
Oh, yes.
And it's interesting because we were talking to another guest as well who said that when it comes to pension saving, there's 3 pillars. One is the government, the other is employers, and the third is, of course, yourself,
Yes.
the individual.
Yes.
Would you like to talk a little bit about these 3 pillars, maybe a little bit more about the government as well as employers and how people themselves can take more initiative?
Yeah. So if you look at any pensioned society in the world, and what is a pension society? A society where the pension assets to GDP ratio is upwards of 50-55% is considered to be a pension society,
Okay.
right? Where a large number of individuals in the economy feel that they are not concerned about retirement. And there are numerous studies that happen around retirement and retirement readiness. There are essentially 3 vectors that one should look at, right? The first is coverage, right? Coverage of any pension plan, right? How good is the coverage of the pension plan? The second is adequacy, right? So the pension plan may exist, but is that adequate to take care of the individual's needs at the time of retirement, right? And the third is sustainability of the plan, right? Sustainability stroke integrity. So if essentially a good pension plan is expected to have these 3, these 3 scores on a high, at a high, right? So when you measure pension societies across the country, across the world, you will see that there are some countries which stand out, right? Netherlands, for example, is ranked number 1 as a pension society. So is the case with Australia. So is the case with Chile. Chile is a country which is, in terms of per capita GDP, maybe 5 times our size. They're roughly 15,000-16,000. So they're not really comparable in that sense. Okay. But the fact is that they are also considered to be a developing country, right? They're a middle income country in some sense, right? But they've been able to get to a pension assets to GDP ratio of roughly 75% now, right? So it's a shining example of how government intervention and corporate advocacy and individual understanding can bring about significant changes in the way an economy gets retirement ready, and an individual gets retirement ready in an economy, right? So the way this whole framework plays out, there are World Bank. There are 3 pillar. The one that you refer to is the 3 pillar framework, right? The 3 pillar framework is essentially there has to be one element or one segment which takes care of some subsistence level income, right? So if you look at India, there are broadly 2 pension schemes that are there. So there is Atal Pension Yojana, right, which you may be familiar with. Atal Pension Yojana is something that is available to an individual who doesn't file income tax, right? Which means that it is available to somebody who is not in the tax net, so to say, right? Which means that, let's say, a daily wage laborer who is not filing income tax can open an Atal Pension Yojana, and the process of opening an Atal Pension Yojana account is actually very, very simple, right? All you need is an Aadhaar card, right? So you walk into the bank branch and you can open an Atal Pension Yojana account. There are close to 6.5 crore Atal Pension Yojana accounts that are there in India today. All the public sector banks and the private sector banks, the large ones, have been mandated to distribute Atal Pension Yojana by the government, which I think is phenomenal, which is a fantastic thing, right? The challenge with Atal Pension Yojana is that it's a great product. However, it requires subsidy from the government, which means that the government needs to subsidize that product because there is a certain minimum pension that is assured to the individual. If you contribute an X amount, you will be assured of a Y amount of pension at the age of superannuation, right? That obviously requires the government to subsidize it or to sort of contribute to it. To that extent, I think it's a great pillar 1, so to say, right? But is it adequate? The answer is no, right? And then I think the government also realizes that 4,000 rupees, and it's capped at 4,000 rupees, right? There have been a lot of representations that have gone out saying you should up this 4,000 to maybe 8,000 or 10,000. But I think that the policy wonks will have to take a call on how they want to sort of deal with it, right? So it does address the issue of coverage to a great extent, but adequacy is something that it does not necessarily address, right? The second is this whole, how do you nudge, how can corporates nudge individuals to start contributing to pension, which is where NPS comes in, right? So these tax advantages that are offered by various, by the government, the fact that it is an extremely low cost product. There is no other product in the world which is as cheap as NPS. There is no actively managed product in the world that is as cheap as NPS, right? NPS, the fund management charges in NPS are between 3 paise and 9 paise. Right? I'm talking about an actively managed fund, which is benchmarked to the BSE 200 total return index, right? So it is the cheapest actively managed product in the world, right? And look at the foresight. Look at people who created this product 20 years back, saying that cost can be one of the biggest leakages. Now, whether 3 to 9 paise is great from an industry perspective is a different argument. I'm not going down that path, right? I'm an industry participant, so I don't want to go down that path, right? We do believe that it can potentially get a little better.
Yes.
But the way it is structured at this point of time, if you take all the costs that are associated, there are some costs for opening an account, there are some costs for contribution and so on and so forth. But all-inclusive cost is less than 15 basis points. If you stay invested for 20, 25 years, the all-inclusive cost for somebody, let's say, who's on contributing 5,000 rupees also, right, is less than 15 basis points a year, right? Which is order of magnitude of difference is 1/10 or 1/20th of the kind of fees and that gets charged by other actively managed vehicles, right? And I have nothing against those. I think those are also absolutely, must have. All I'm saying is that here is a product which is incredibly tax efficient. It is not just tax efficient from an entry perspective. I spoke about 80CCD 1B and 80CCD 2, but look at it this way, right? So any accretions that happen because it is a market-linked product, there is no tax that is there on the accretion. Also, this is the only product where the entire corpus that you get at the time of superannuation is entirely tax-free. The only requirement is that there is a 60-40 combination. So 60% of the corpus that you have at the time of superannuation needs to get invested in, is available to you tax-free. The remaining 40% needs to get invested into buying an annuity, right? But the reality is that the entire 100 rupee corpus or the 100% corpus is available to you tax-free, because any product that you invest into, the income that you will draw from that is going to be taxed in any case, and so is the case with annuity, right? So it's a exempt product. The other thing that I want to talk about is that unlike in PPF and EPF, there is a limit on how much you can put in those, right? There is no limit here. So if you choose, you can put in as much amount of money as you want into tier 1. You will get tax advantages to the extent of what I explained earlier, but you continue to enjoy the tax benefit of, tax exemption accrual, and of course tax exemption at the time of the maturity as well.
You were talking about a pension society and the retirement readiness. You compared various countries. Where does India stand?
Very poorly. Right now, if you look at there is a Mercer CFA study of 2023. Out of the 48 countries that were surveyed, we are 47th in that, right? So clearly, we've got a long, long way to go, right? In terms of addressing all of these three things, right? Coverage, adequacy, sustainability, stroke integrity, right? So our rank today, to answer your question, is we are not there yet. But I think we've got a fantastic set of enablers that are in place. I think the government realizes this. The amount of advocacy that the government has been making towards NPS as a product has been incredible. We've seen significant support from the government. The regulators have been, driving the agenda of, so PFRDA stands for Pension Fund Regulatory and Development Authority. So they've been putting a lot of attention on the development aspect of their agenda. But as we speak, I think we are miles away from where we need to get to, right? The beauty is that we've got a long enough runway, but we have to wake up fast. Otherwise, we are staring at a fairly grim situation.
I like that. Wake up now. But it also requires this sort of long-term commitment, being very disciplined, much like any other, equity instrument. Do you think that there is this sort of concern when it comes to lack of liquidity from clients? And how do you address that?
Very good question. In fact, that takes me back to this very interesting exercise that we did. Must have been 3-4 months back. And we started using it in our presentation. It's sort of starting to resonate with people,
Uh-huh.
right? And I said, let's look at NPS with its so-called constraint of liquidity, right? And let's look at a dream NPS, which is a product without liquidity constraints, right?
Okay.
So you can get in and get out whenever you want, but it's an NPS product, right? So let's compare the performance of these two products over the last 15 years. 2009 is when the All Citizens model was launched in NPS, right? 2004, it was launched for government employees. In 2009, it was launched for all citizens in India, right? So we said, okay, so what happens? So let's look at investor behavior, right? I mean, you've been in this, you've seen this business long enough. I have spent enough time in this business, three decades now.
Yeah.
What happens when market corrections happen? And when I say market corrections, I'm talking about deep corrections, right? 15-20% correction. What do people do? And I've seen the most sophisticated of investors saying, listen, boss, I think there is something seriously wrong. What I'm going to do is to bring down my allocation to equity to near zero, stand on the sidelines. I will sit on cash. I'll have dry powder, so to say. And I will get back in the market when I can see some sort of, stability, right? And where I see a kind of a secular up move is when I will get back into the market. This is typically the behavior, right? What actually happens is that, of course, people do sort of liquidate when 2008 happened, when, I used to be in a bank those days, or 2021 happened when I used to again, 2020 happened when the COVID scare, and I was again in the wealth management business at that point of time. Even the most sophisticated investors practically liquidated their entire portfolio and stood on the sidelines, right? What ended up happening was that they never got back into the market till the time that it was above that level at which they would have got out, at least 10% above that, right? Now let's look at, NPS, the NPS as it exists, the one which has got this constraint, and then there is NPS, which is this dream NPS, right? Where there's no liquidity constraint. If you were to mimic this investor behavior and apply it to both these products, and in a product where there is no liquidity constraint, I would assume that you would come out of it, right? You would come out and do what I just explained one typically does, right? So we mimicked this whole thing over the last 15 years and said, what happens if NPS did not have a liquidity constraint? How much would you have ended up making as a terminal value? Let's say if you were to get out of that product today, or what is the terminal value as of today, right? You will be shocked to see that the difference is actually 2x. So NPS, the way it is today, would have got you to 37 lakhs, right? And an NPS with liquidity, full liquidity, where you would have done this in and out because of these behavioral biases that we have, all of us suffer from this, you would have ended up with 18 lakhs. And I'm talking about investing this mandatory 50,000 rupees, so-called mandatory 50,000 rupees a year for the last 15 years, right? Yeah. So that's the difference, so right? So we've now embedded this in our client presentations. We actually talk about it. We talk about it as the power of, we actually call it the illiquidity bonus.
Okay.
Right? The lock-in bonus, so whatever you want to call it, right? I mean, we can come with fancy terms, right? But the reality is that the fact that this product does not allow you to get out is, in my opinion, one of the biggest positives about this product, right? Otherwise, you are bound to, everybody is a victim of their own, of all the noise, right?
Yeah.
Frankly, there is so much of noise around you that it's very difficult for individuals to ignore that noise.
Yeah.
And this product forces you to ignore that noise because you can't do anything about it.
You're stuck for life, and it's a big positive for you. Yeah. Speaking of, tax changes, can you tell us a little bit more about the change that was implemented in ATCC D2 and what the further expectation is on this front?
Well, I can't comment about what the expectations in the future are because that only the finance minister and her team knows about this.
Okay.
But I think the fact that they recognize
what the wish list is, maybe.
What the wish list? Okay, the wish list is that this is obviously we obviously want everything from the government, right?
Yeah.
Having said that, I think the change, I'll just focus on the same change first. So under ATCCD 2, till last budget, the extent of deduction that was available was 10% of one's basic, right? Yeah. For NPS. EPF, as all you would know, is 12% of basic, right? So there was this, and government employees have been always contributing 14% of their basic towards NPS. The government contributes 14%, employee contributes 10%, right? So this was to bring parity between the government segment and the private sector or the all citizen segment, and therefore 10% contribution, that was the earlier limit, was increased to 14% of the basic, right? So that's a 4% increase. So that's a 40% increase in contribution that you can make as an employer towards your employees' NPS kitty, right? Significant change, right? And hopefully, I mean, this is the important thing is that 80CCD2 is available to you under the new tax regime. I spoke about this earlier, but it's not very well understood, right? So this is available even under the new tax regime because this is a deduction that is happening as an employer contribution, right? It's not a deduction that the employee is availing on their own self, right? So that's the key difference.
You know, a lot of people are fairly actively invested in various different asset classes and avenues. They're quite active. Can you recommend some sort of a simple, actionable framework as well when it comes to clients to look at NPS as well as an option? Or what is it, the messaging that you want to send out to them?
Two parts to this question, right? Number one, I don't think there are lots of people who've got 2 crores. So that's a very small, segment of the population. But still, we must address them as well.
Yeah.
So NPS at the end of the day is a product, right? I don't think we should confuse an asset class with a product, right? It is an actively managed fund. That's what NPS is. It comes with significant benefits that we covered earlier, be it cost, be it tax advantages, be it the fact that it is tax advantages at different stages, right? And the fact that it is very tightly regulated, by which I mean there is a certain framework that's been drawn out by PFRDA. As we speak, the only universe of equity stocks that we can invest in is the top 200 by market capitalization on the non-national stock exchange. That's the universe that we operate under, right? Every quarter, PFRDA and NPS Trust, which is an intermediary of PFRDA, which is responsible for monitoring the performance of the pension fund managers. The pension fund managers, of course, have full flexibility to act within the boundary walls that has been defined by PFRDA. But there is no other product that I know of where there is somebody who's overseeing the performance and making sure that they are within the sort of boundaries that have been drawn out for the product, right? So therefore, from that perspective, this is an actively managed fund, right? Now, because of the fact that it offers you significant tax advantages, you need to take that into account when you look at your overall portfolio. Let's look at this, right? So if you take a equity mutual fund or a balanced mutual fund, you still will end up paying 12.5% capital gains, right? As per what the current tax laws are. Here you pay 0, which means that for the same performance, right? And by the way, NPS funds compare very favorably when you compare it with over long periods of time with large cap mutual funds, which is what the right comparison is, right? If you look at large cap mutual funds and NPS performance, NPS actually over 10-year time horizons compare very favorably, right? So from a performance perspective, it is right up there. So you're not compromising on performance for the sake of tax advantages. So exceptional performance, very, 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 very minuscule cost leakage, which I spoke about earlier, and the fact that the performance is comparable to the best in the class, right? And therefore, you need to look at it as a part of your overall asset allocation, plug it into your overall equity allocation, whatever is the amount of equity allocation that you have inside NPS. You could have, again, there is significant flexibility that's available, which again is not very well understood by people, right? So you can move across asset classes, which I'm not a big fan of, but it does offer you the flexibility at 0 cost, 0 tax, right? You can do that change 4 times in a year. You can change your fund manager once a year, right? So that kind of flexibility is truly incredible, right? You want to try and do that in the actively managed mutual fund universe, you can't do that in the sense that you have to pay taxes or there are some costs that are associated with doing these things, right? So to that extent, I think consider this as a part of your overall, asset allocation architecture, but with, a number of features which are plus, plus, plus. And therefore make sure that this sort of, unless, so if you have 50% of your money in NPS in equity, it is a part of your equity asset allocation, right? But it comes with some significant benefits, right? So that's the way I would look at it. So it's a product at the end of the day.
Yes, and you've highlighted all of the benefits, but I'm sure there are some common mistakes as well that investors make when investing in NPS. Are there any, and how can they be avoided?
One of the biggest mistakes that I see people, come, and this is what I've seen. See, you need to be conscious of the asset allocation calls that you're taking, right? I see a number of them. In fact, very recently I was talking to a CEO of a very large listed public company, and he said, I've had this NPS investment for the last 10 years, but it's only given me 9%. I said, can you show me your statement? He showed me the statement and the allocation to equity was 25%. I said, how do you expect this vehicle to deliver supernormal returns when your allocation to equity is only 25%? He said, oh, I never knew this. So maybe as an industry, we need to do more to sort of, and these kind of shows obviously help in that process. But there is a lot more that we can do to make sure that people take advantage. I mean, it's not just about starting the journey, right? A lot of companies, what they've also done is that they've said, there is a default scheme that they start with.
Yeah.
The default scheme may have a smaller allocation to equity, right?
Yeah.
So many a times it is too late by the time people realize that, and I've seen this mistake being committed by a number of people, so-called sophisticated people who understand financial products very well, right? They don't know what is the asset allocation within their NPS, and you can actually do it at the click of a button. You go on to the, all the CRAs offer a mobile app. You go there. It's an OTP-based process. You can change your asset allocation at the click of, it takes 2 minutes to do that.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
And in 3 days, your asset allocation is changed. Right? The other thing is that there are basically 5 variants which are there, right? So there is the auto choice, basket where there is conservative, moderate, and aggressive, where there is different allocations to equity and debt. And then there is something called, which is recently launched, it's called the balanced life cycle fund, right? And then there is the active choice, right? So these are the 5 broad choices that are available to the investor. I don't think people are aware of all of these sufficiently, right? A number of people blame the product without really understanding what are the steps that they have taken, right? So that's number one. So one, they haven't understood the architecture of the product.
Yeah.
Second is they don't put in enough money, right? There is this belief that, 50,000 rupees dal dete, let's put in this 50,000 rupees or whatever minimum mandatory, as if it is yet another tax saving product.
Yeah.
It is a tax saving product, but it's an incredibly powerful product. It can really power your portfolio if you do the right things and have the right asset allocation in this product. And it's got a beautiful, the auto choice option that I spoke to you about. On your birth anniversary, it actually brings down your allocation to equity every year.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah.
In fact, I'll talk about the balanced life cycle fund, which was launched recently. So starting the age of 45, so you, at inception, 50% goes into equity and 50% goes into corporate bonds and government securities. You can choose between the two. I mean, there's a certain allocation that goes to government securities and corporate bonds. So that's the fixed income part. So 50-50 allocation to equity and fixed income. As you hit the age of 45, the allocation to equity keeps coming down from 50 to 35, right? So without you having to do anything, on your birth date, the allocation to equity will keep coming down from 15 to 35, which is 1.5% roughly per year over the course of these 10 years. And at the age of 55, you have an allocation towards equity of 35%, right? So there is automatic risk management that is happening. So these are all things that I would want more and more people to know and take advantage of.
Yes. That is very critical, but I think still the perception, or a lot of people get very overwhelmed with the sheer complexity of retirement planning.
Yeah.
So is there any way to make it less intimidating?
Well, I think, as I said, in the beginning, we spoke about the fact that this is a subset of financial planning, right? So when you look at retirement planning, gets intimidating if you sort of waited too long to do it, right? I mean, at the age of 50, if suddenly says I have to now start planning for my retirement, you barely got 10 years to go, which means that time is not on your side. I mean, 10 years is still okay, right? But your ability to see over a 10-year time horizon, you could argue that Nifty has never lost money, right? 78% of the times you would make a double-digit return, right? But there is 22% of the time where you could potentially make single-digit returns, right? Which may not work well for you if you're 50 years old. So therefore, intimidation happens when it gets intimidating when you sort of delayed this process for way too long, right? So I would suggest that first step is to, financial planning also for some people is intimidating, right? I mean, having this conversation with the financial advisor, because you're going to get into the gory details, right? Of saying, how much am I spending? Am I spending 80% of whatever I'm making? Am I sort of spending 30-40% of my salary in the form of EMIs? So those are all, very uncomfortable conversations. But I think you have to have these uncomfortable conversations at the right time, right? And retirement planning, just participate in products such as these. EPF is something that everybody mandatorily has to participate in. And we've been actually sort of lobbying with the government to make it an alternative between EPF and NPS, which of course is not easy to do, but we've been sort of appealing, saying that, why don't you make it alternative, right? And because NPS has this whole market link flavor to it, and it can potentially deliver a significantly large return. But even making sure that you have your EPF sorted out, which I think is also a great vehicle because it has a certain guaranteed sort of guaranteed flavor to it. But most certainly NPS. You start that journey, right? Even if you start putting in 2.5, 3, 4, 5,000 to that kitty every month, you've made a beginning, right? And as time progresses, you will see that it is going to sort of pleasantly surprise you in terms of the kind of money that it can build for you over a period of time. So I think retirement planning has got various other aspects. It's not just about making sure that you have enough money. It's also about making sure that you have enough to do. You are in good health at that point of time, right? So I think retirement planning is a much wider subject in my opinion. But for a young person today, right, make the beginning, right? Take the first step, because the journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step, right? Take that first step. It doesn't take you more than 5 minutes to open an NPS account. Start investing, right? And you can keep debating till the cows come home after that, right? But make the beginning, right? That in itself can change the way things work out for you as time progresses.
Okay, Sriram, let's now dive into a rapid fire where we get sort of crisper, briefer answers from you, because there's so many myths surrounding NPS. So let's dive in. Are you ready?
Sure, of course.
Okay, so is NPS only for government employees?
Nothing could be further from the truth. Absolutely not. In fact, last year, is it not only is it available to every single Indian, that's there in the country, every single Indian right from the age of 0 can start investing.
Okay.
Right. So there was a scheme called NPS Vatsalya that was launched by the Honorable Finance Minister in September 2024. So even a child can start investing in NPS today. So there is absolutely no bar on who can start investing in NPS. Every and any individual is absolutely.
What about the contribution to NPS? Can it be more than 1.5 lakh rupees?
100%. It can be more than 1.5 lakh rupees. In fact, there is no such constraint at all in NPS, right? Because please keep in mind that this is a product that is funded by the individual. It is a market-linked product, and the performance of the product is going to be a function of what the individual does, right? So there is no subsidy from anybody into this product, and therefore there is no limit on how much you can invest. There is, of course, limits on how much you get in terms of tax advantages.
Okay.
Those limits are there, but absolutely no limit in terms of how much you can invest in this.
No limit on investing.
In fact, I want to add to this. There is something called a Tier 2 account in NPS, which is also something that gets talked about not so often. Tier 2 account is actually a ultra low cost actively managed fund.
Okay.
Right? So you can use it as a parking vehicle, you can use it as an accumulation tool, and at an appropriate time, you can actually move money from Tier 2 to Tier 1 as well, right? So that's a bit of an aside which I wanted to sort of touch upon.
Are the withdrawals from the NPS completely restricted until retirement?
There are premature withdrawals that one can do. There are, of course, it doesn't compare with the kind of withdrawals that you can do in, let's say, a comparable product like EPF. It's not a comparable product, a product like EPF, a retirement product like EPF. So there are limitations on how much you can withdraw. You can withdraw, partial withdrawals are only to the extent of 25% of your own contribution that you've made into the account. You can, of course, terminate the account after 5 years, right? If you terminate the account after 5 years, you close the account after 5 years, 80% of the corpus that has got accumulated needs to be used for purchasing an annuity. 20% comes to you tax-free.
What happens to NPS if I change my jobs, or if I'm now self-employed or become an entrepreneur after having worked with a company?
That's the beauty of this product, right? So this product is entirely portable. It's portable between company A to company B. It's portable between from corporate segment to retail segment, from retail segment to corporate segment. So you can actually, and all of these things happen within a matter of few days, right? I mean, you move from company A to company B, and if the company B also has signed up for corporate NPS, which in all likelihood they would have, because as we speak, there are 18,500 companies in India who have signed up for corporate NPS. So you need to be registered with one of the points of presence for you to be able to offer NPS to your employees, right?
Shyam, thank you so much. That's been so insightful, really. I think the messaging out there with the power of compounding that individuals really need to harness. Lots of key takeaways that while India is a young population, the fact of the matter is that in the next 25 years, 32 crore Indians are going to be above the age of 60. Our retirement preparedness is very poor, so it is in your hands to take advantage of the power of compounding. Start somewhere. Investing in NPS is a very powerful tool. It's part of the basket of overall financial planning, lots of tax benefits as well, great performance, low cost leakage, and it is also a very important part of asset allocation architecture that you should implement as part of your retirement savings. And it is very important as well to consult a professional, certified, unbiased financial advisor. Curious to know, have you started your retirement planning journey? Do write to us in the comments section below. With that, we'll wrap it up on this episode. Do remember to hit the subscribe button. Thanks so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next episode.